Well, hello everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. We have nearly 200 people that had asked to join this webinar. Hopefully many of you have been able to join from all over the world. Just a few matters. You should be automatically muted, but if you can go on mute, that would be very helpful. In addition, we really do encourage and want questions from as many of you as wish to ask them. I'll keep an eye on those questions as they come in and feed them into the conversation. But I do emphasize, please do ask questions and we'll hopefully get round to answering some of them. We very much want this to be a practical session. Our comments around giving some practical tips and thoughts as to how business development should be done in this current and somewhat strange environment we now find ourselves in. I'm very pleased to be joined on this webinar by 5 people with very clear views on business development by lawyers. I'm particularly pleased that we have a client, Emma Slatter of Visa, with us. We have 3 BD executives, Brian, Katie, and Rochelle, whose day job is business development, and Tom Bird, who trains lawyers how to be good at BD. And they will each briefly introduce themselves in a moment. These 5 and several others helped me produce the 2nd edition of the IBA Globe book on business development. And the launch of this book, I'll waive it, so I've met my obligations to the publisher. The launch of this book was really the catalyst for this webinar. But after the book came out, COVID happened. And what we're going to explore in this session is what good BD looks like in a COVID-impacted world, but very much drawing on what good business development looks like in any environment. Because I think what you'll hear from us all is, although some adaptation is necessary given the current environment, it is about doing the right thing. And we will try and draw out those thoughts based on many of the remarks that we've included in the book. And we're very much operating from the premise that business development does not and should not stop in the current environment. But we should definitely think about how it needs to be done somewhat differently. How we adapt to no physical meetings. How do we adapt to general counsel, many general counsel being busier than ever, working very, very long hours in often challenging circumstances. And also adapting to companies under enormous pressure in terms of their own businesses, and therefore being very focused on costs and minimizing costs and maximizing value. And that is the environment that we're in. We'll also hopefully touch upon, in a sense, some of the opportunities that the current environment gives rise to in terms of business development. In a moment, we're going to hear initially from Brian, Rochelle, Katie, and Tom on how COVID has impacted their thinking on business development based on their contributions to the book, but equally importantly, how we need to adapt those thoughts to the current environment. But first, I just wanted to highlight my favorite part of the book, which is part 2, which is a collection of interviews with general counsel, including Emma, 12 general counsel from across the world. And if you read nothing in the book other than that part, then I think you will have got a lot out of the book. Having said that, you should clearly read the chapters of the present panelists. I can't underscore enough the importance of talking to, listening to, and understanding the needs of the client. And I think in some cases, we've seen business development as a process of some sort, and in some cases delinking it from the client. And I think we all need to reflect on how important the client element is, and the interviews in the book, I think, really do draw those thoughts out. I was struck by the commonality of views across a very broad and diverse range of general counsel. I think all of them talked about the importance of doing good work. And I think none of us can forget that that underpins any business development, and indeed business development without good work is a waste of time. And I think particularly in the current environment, being seen by the clients to be going that extra mile to demonstrate you've called various people up and have gone back with a considered answer will impress the client in these difficult and more challenging times. So really thinking about how to do good work underpins everything. But the three messages I'd like to just share based on those interviews, and I don't think they change with COVID, is our need to understand clients' needs better and clients' businesses better, to be better at more targeted business development. Secondly, clients are looking to us for far more than just legal advice. To a certain extent, clients take our ability to provide the right answer as somewhat of a given. They wouldn't be talking to us in the first place if they didn't think we were good lawyers. And therefore, it's about the commerciality of our advice and the relationships we build, underpinned by my first point, which is a deep understanding of the client's business. Thirdly, and I think this is accentuated by the COVID situation, price remains relevant. We have to talk about the price of our services and how we're going to charge for them. But I think somewhat encouragingly, one of the messages that came through from the interviews was that clients look for value, not necessarily the cheapest bid. And therefore we must demonstrate that we're delivering value at any price point and whatever our type of firm or service. So certainly COVID does not mean reaching out to clients should stop. If anything, it's an opportunity to have a more personal based outreach, and that should be encouraged throughout our firms. I say it should be encouraged throughout the firm because I think it shouldn't be left to individuals maybe or maybe not picking up the phone to a particular client. So there does need to be a bit of firm coordination. And I know this importance of coordination is something that Brian will mention. We're all very more reliant on technology in this current COVID environment, but I think technology does give us some opportunities to organize outreach to clients, and we should be using technology for business development in the same way as we're using it for client advice and providing support to clients in other ways. Simply sitting here and saying to a client, let's have lunch when we can, is not good business development and isn't acceptable either to a law firm or to the client, I would argue. So with that, I'd now like to ask Brian to both briefly introduce himself and make some remarks on his perspective on business development. Brian.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Yes, so I'm the Business Development Director for Arendt. For those of you who haven't heard of Arendt, we are the largest law firm in Luxembourg. We have 6 other offices across the globe and around about 800 employees in the group. So my chapter was really focused on the structures and approaches to BD and looking at some of the more usual approaches in terms of practice groups, industry groups. We also have what's now called product groups, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, if you are in a law firm with a larger geographical footprint, you'll have different offices across the globe, and you may also have country teams who are focusing on a particular country where you don't have a presence. So there's a lot of BD activity generally in law firms, I think the key now is all around coordination. What I found when the crisis first happened was the phone starts to ring and it's our employment lawyers and they want to talk to the market. You know, we need to reach out to them now. That was closely followed by a call from our restructuring and insolvency lawyers, closely followed by economic measures that were announced by the government in each country. So our public sector guys get involved. And I think the first thing to do is really pause and think about, are we taking a client-centric approach to BD? And are we maintaining that? So within the book, I talk a lot about the different approaches we can take. I've always said a client-centric approach is the best, and I still believe that. But within different law firms, sometimes you have a very powerful practice group, and they will have their own list of target clients and key clients, and that might be different than the rest of the firm. Now, this is just a recipe for disaster. And the first thing I did after the COVID crisis was to take an audit of all the different groups that we had. And I said, right, we now need to coordinate all of our activity. Everything comes through my team. Obviously, I talk a lot to the partners. We spend a lot of time in different groups, but there has to be a point of common coordination. And I usually see that as BD, because we are present in a lot of these other groups. So really having a look at how you currently interact with clients, and then focusing more around the kind of key issues. So trying to really say, okay, what are the issues our clients are facing right now? And there's no point thinking about a 2 or 3 year strategy and talking to clients in that way, because some clients, frankly, won't be here in 12 months and they're really concerned about what they do right now. So I think there's certainly a focus that I spoke about in the book about being very issues driven. For example, there are a number of issues that our clients face in commonality. So irrespective of the sector that they're in, irrespective of which part of the world they're in, there will be certain things that are absolutely crucial to them. And we need to organize ourselves in the way that really talks to this audience. And often we would do that through things like campaigns. And again, a campaign is something that is very structured. It's something that's very helpful. And it's something that cuts across all of the different practice areas. So we don't go to market, for example, with a specific tax idea. We try and broaden out all of the issues clients will have. Some of them could be tax, some of them could be employment, but we really need to break that down into what is happening here and now, and how can we help our clients in these areas in a very issues-led dialogue. A lot of this is easier to coordinate if you already have client relationship partners in your law firm. So if you already have that, then that's a lot easier to organize. If you don't, then you really should consider how you structure your teams so that you have one person in charge. And I think that's quite crucial. So you can still have lots and lots of relationships, but there has to be a point at which you come together as a team and somebody has to lead that team. So if you don't have client relationship partners, you really need to think about that. I also speak in the book about client segmentation, and that's never been more important now. Some of our clients are in particular segments that are really, really struggling. Others, technology, for example, we're using Zoom now. There's lots of opportunities out there, but it's really thinking about your clients in the broadest sense, thinking about which segments they're in and what issues they have, and then coordinating your activities so that clients aren't getting multiple calls, multiple emails, any kind of marketing jargon. It has to be relevant and it has to be coordinated. And I think that those are the key things, Stephen.
Stephen, you're still muted.
I'm muted.
Thank you, Brian. I think your point about coordination is really important because for those of us who are still working from home, it's very easy to think, oh, you know, it's Wednesday morning, I'll do some business development. And you get out your notional list of contacts and start ringing people, only to find that one of your colleagues has already spoken to them and they're feeling, you know, inundated from that particular law firm. So I think coordination is arguably even more important in this COVID environment. Rochelle, if we can now turn to you, not only to get your perspectives, but also a feeling of what's going on in the US.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I'm Rochelle Rubin. I serve as the Director of Client Development for Haynes & Boone, which is an Am Law 100 firm based in the US. We have almost 600 lawyers across 17 offices worldwide. I'm responsible for implementing strategies that institutionalize our client base, which I'll get into in a moment. And at the risk of dating myself, I have over 20 years of experience in legal and professional services, from strategy and marketing to operations and technology. With respect to the book, I co-authored the first chapter on how marketing professionals can impact the bottom line. We cover a very broad spectrum of topics in this particular chapter, but it's all based on, as Brian mentioned, the client-centric strategies that can impact the bottom line. And not only do we give an overview of all of these areas, but we also focus quite a bit on the practical tactics for implementing these strategies. I too would like to point out a few things, also highlighting certain points that were both mentioned by Stephen and Brian, and how important these things are, in particular in the current environment. First, client feedback programs. Our managing partner will tell you this is one of the most important aspects of his role. These are not sales calls. He does meet one-on-one with clients and thanks them for the trust that they put in the firm and solicits feedback on our firm's performance, asks us what we're doing well, where we can make improvements, what other outside counsel firms are doing that we should also consider doing. And interestingly enough, almost every time he hears that we are one of the few firms doing these one-on-one calls. Meetings. These are actually in-person meetings typically. And he prepares very well for them, takes detailed notes, and immediately comes back to the lead relationship lawyer or the team to share what he has learned. And I will say, based on the 5 years that he's been doing this, that our collections tend to increase for the overwhelming majority of the clients who we happen to interview. Obviously, these have not been, haven't been able to do the in-person meetings during COVID. So he has gone back and looked at all the people who he's met over the last 5 years, and he is doing more casual check-in calls with all of these people just to check in on their well-being. Again, not sales calls, just to let them know that we're thinking about them. Another aspect in the chapter is also something Brian touched on, are client account teams. I help manage those for our firm. This is a very focused approach to targeting clients with the highest potential for growth. Not necessarily your biggest clients, just where we think there's opportunities based on maybe changes at that client, for example. We approach everything through a very coordinated, systematic process to expand the relationships and the work at those clients. All of the business development efforts are synchronized and designed to maximize cross-collaboration opportunities. I will say the success for these particular programs is to not only have the support of firm management, but to choose very strong and enthusiastic client team leads. And just based on my personal experience, I have found that women tend to make the better team leads, just based on my particular experience. We are continuing our client meetings during this pandemic, and we are encouraging business development outreach. One of our client team leaders actually hosted a virtual lunch with some folks from her client, which was very successful. So again, I think clients just appreciate the outreach. Another very important aspect of any BD outreach efforts is the underlying market and competitive intelligence that you have. It's hugely important to have data analytics since that informs absolutely everything from your overall strategic direction of the firm to helping with the relationship mapping on the teams, helping lawyers prepare for their business development meetings, in particular if it's a new person or in a new industry. Just also, you can use all this data to help provide valuable insights into the impact, and sometimes even measuring the ROI for certain efforts. At my firm, we do annual analysis on both the client target program, the account teams, as well as the client interview program. And we found some very interesting results from all of that. And I would also say, just lastly, in the chapter itself, one of the components that I don't think most firms do focus on, and believe it or not, this comes up quite often during the client interviews, is succession planning. For a lot of firms, a very large percentage of revenues is still controlled by a relatively small group of the lawyers who are nearing retirement. It's just another area where many law firms don't necessarily take a purposeful, proactive approach to transitioning those client relationships to the next generation. It's surprising how often general counsel have brought that up during the client interviews. And it's never too early to start planning. And because not a lot of firms are doing it, it's also a great way for a law firm to differentiate itself and start planning ahead to institutionalize these clients. So when these senior partners do slowly retire, they're very comfortable with the team that is still there and in place. I'll just say all the components in the chapter and everything I've just mentioned all goes to the firm's brand. The bottom line really is a firm needs to live and breathe its brand. It's a big part of all the communications that go out internally, externally to your alumni. All of that has to do with the brand. All the brand messaging needs to be consistent, relevant, habitual across all communications, and your business development team can certainly help with that. But it's a big, important part of what we do at my firm, and we constantly stress the firm's strategies and provide real-life stories that showcase how the lawyers are living the brand. And I just want to say, during the COVID environment, it is extremely important to do personal outreach. And I don't mean emails, I mean calling your clients, asking about them and their family, maybe sending a small, thoughtful gift. It goes a long way in helping solidify your relationships. We had one lawyer send cookies or biscuits to all those clients with children. I had another who thought it would be great to send designer face masks for her clients. So it's very important to think about these things. The clients will appreciate the personal touch points. And if you need any more ideas for remote business development tactics, there is an article that I wrote, and it was published in Bloomberg Law just last month, referring to very specific tactics you can do during this pandemic.
Great, Rochelle. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for highlighting your recent article, which I certainly read with interest, and I think does underscore some of those good practice tips that you were referring to. So thank you for that. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. So yeah, I'm Tom Bird. Like Rochelle, I've got, I guess, 20 years experience of working with lawyers. I've written a book called Brilliant Selling, as well as contributing to this chapter. And my total focus is on working with lawyers all around the world. I do a lot of work in Asia, a little bit in South America, a lot of work in Europe, around business development and influencing. And the chapter in the book that I contributed was around how do you teach fee earners, partners to do business development. And I guess at the heart of this is the fact that most lawyers are very intellectually bright, and with very few exceptions, they didn't study long and hard to get into the law in order to sell. So one of the challenges that I think is at the root of what we cover in the chapter that I contributed is trying to redefine what business development is for a fee earner, and that it's not about selling, because when you're the product, as soon as a client feels they are being sold to, then of course your credibility reduces. So if it's not about selling, what is it about? And so some of the stuff that we cover really links to what Brian has said and what Rochelle has said. So picking up on Brian's point, you know, commercial understanding and being able to be seen by a client as being integrated. These are themes, along with focus on relationships. So when we did out of Cambridge some research into buyers of legal services, the three things that came out loud and clear that haven't changed in the COVID environment that they really want to see from a lawyer that differentiates them is a business understanding and knowledge, a focus on relationship, and a firm that is visibly integrated. Now, there is nothing there about selling. So I think mindset is at the heart of a lot of what I do. It's helping lawyers understand that if they feel that you can think your way into a new way of behaving, which is often the case, with business development, it's a contact sport. You have to behave your way into a new way of thinking. So I'm picking up on what Rochelle just said. You know, one of the things that I think is absolutely more true now than it ever was, and Rochelle's point's very well made, is people only care what you know when they know that you care. And so some of the best BD activity that I've seen most recently is when a lawyer has simply reached out as a human and just shown some humanity, some empathy. Now, at the heart of everything that we cover in the book is the recognition that business development is pretty simple, as long as you've got focus and discipline. So if you've got focus and discipline, what should you be doing? Well, it is all about how you engage with a client. And right now, in these particular times, reaching out by telephone or by Zoom, way more preferable than doing it by email. When you do reach out, it's making a connection. It's also recognizing that some of you who have joined this webinar have probably read a book by David Maister called The Trusted Advisor. And one of the things that David Maister is very clear on is that if you want to build the kind of personal trust between you as a lawyer and your client, the intimacy factor, the knowledge of both the client's business and the client as an individual and their context within their organization is an absolutely critical differentiator. And so helping lawyers understand that, you know, if you look at the people who are really best at business development, when I look at those guys, some of the things that they do, one thing that stands out, people who are outstanding at business development are happy asking clients questions they don't know the answer to. And a lot of the people I work with only tend to ask their clients questions they've already got an answer in their mind for. And that allows them to be comfortable, it allows them to feel safe, but it won't uncover deeper business needs. And I think fundamentally, as I hand over back to Stephen, you know, one of the things that's really important is that crisis is often an accelerator of change. And if it's an accelerator of a change, I think it's even more important that lawyers need to ask better questions to get under the covers of what's really going on. The organizations you're selling to, they're no longer in a performance mode for a lot of them, they're in a learning mode. And you've got to be curious about, well, what can I do to support that? What part can I play to support the individuals that I'm working with? So that's kind of the stuff that we talk about in my chapter. Stephen, back to you.
Thanks, Tom. Just picking up on your last point about, in a sense, the current crisis being a catalyst for change. And I think you're encouraging us to change, but in the interactions you're having, are you actually seeing us change? Or is this something we still should be doing? Or are you actually seeing some good examples of change actually occurring?
I think both. I think we can always do more. And it's back to the opening comments you made that we have to reach out, we have to be proactive, we have to ask better questions to uncover needs. And I think when you're in a time of change, the Kubler-Ross cycle that many of the viewers will be familiar with, this idea that when you go into change, the first stage is denial, and then you move into resistance, and then you move into exploration, and then you move into acceptance. When this pandemic hit, a lot of people were in denial and resistance, and they were focused very much inwardly on their jobs, their safety, their health, and their immediate environment. And I think what we are seeing, and I know speaking to Katie before we broadcast today, you know, a lot of lawyers are getting much busier. And so people are coming through those stages and they're saying to themselves, look, you know, the world is going on in some way. So we've got to engage with it. And I think it's the job of the lawyers now to notice that and to simply ask better questions and proactively reach out. I think Brian's point, you've got to do it in an integrated way. There's nothing worse than 2 or 3 people from the same firm ringing a client. It just demonstrates lack of cohesion and integration. But I think it is about picking up the phone, and it is about making a Zoom call, and it's not about having a preconceived agenda other than finding out what's going on for that client.
And in that sense, the current environment gives us an excuse to do that somehow is a bit easier than in more normal conditions. So it's certainly the right form of encouragement that you talk about, Tom. So thank you.
But I think, Stephen, just one final thing to say on that. It is easier, but through technology like Zoom, as the lawyer making a call, you've got to deliver a little bit more leadership when you make that call. You won't get a client to open up just by saying, how are things? You've got to make time, and you've got to plan questions that demonstrate a genuine desire to understand their reality. And I think that's the thing that I haven't seen as much of. It is the use of intelligent questions to build an empathy at the start of the call and making enough time to do that.
Again, a good point, Tom, because one of the things that came out loud and clear from the GC interviews is that, in a sense, none of us do enough homework, either before a meeting or before a Zoom call or a pitch. We don't, even read what's publicly available about the client, and you're right to underscore the fact that that's even more important, particularly what's the client said about the current environment. Has it just made 8,000 people redundant, and you sort of sail in and talk about the weather? I think it shows a distinct lack of preparation, whatever you say, if you've not done that homework. So well said, and thank you. Katie, over to you. I think this morning when we were chatting, you were saying you're busier now than you've ever been. So you might comment on that as well as share with us your remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Cramond, and I'm currently leading the business development function in the UK for US headquartered firm McDermott, Will and Emery. Prior to that, I had the great privilege of working with the fantastic Mr. Stephen Revell at Freshfields for 7 years in Singapore, London, New York and beyond. So just quickly, because I'm conscious of time, and I want to get on to the great stuff that Emma's going to talk about from the client perspective as well, but the chapter that I contributed to was titled Business Development, the Nuts and Bolts. And it was really meant to provide a practical guide to the infrastructure required to support the business development lifecycle. And we split the business development lifecycle into the 3 stages: spotting opportunities, winning business, and growing relationships. So we really wanted it to be practical, so we put lots of templates and processes, there's kind of the tools, activities, which help a law firm achieve its strategic objectives. I think, naturally COVID-19 has impacted the legal landscape, but as Brian and Rochelle have alluded to, the fundamentals in terms of infrastructure and general approach to business development haven't dramatically changed. I think it's still differentiating your firm through organized, thoughtful business development. And I think that activity is at the very center of what law firms should be focusing on at the moment. As Brian alluded to as well, it's client focused, it's empathetic, as Tom was saying, and it's kind of forward looking. So I think that's all I'm going to say on the chapter. Very happy to talk about what it's like to kind of speak to new clients at the moment and what I'm seeing some examples of at my firm at the moment, if that would be helpful, Stephen.
Yes, please pick up on that, because I think that's an illustration of what's going on in the current environment.
Yeah, so we kind of thought about the question, can you develop a new client in the current environment? And I think I'm going to be brave and say yes. I think, meeting a new client for the first time virtually is not ideal, and it comes with its challenges. And it does depend, of course, on the contact and the client. But, to Tom's point, I think people are open to change. And while some people will find it difficult to convey that enthusiasm and energy, around business development, I think the people that do are really going to steal a march. And, you know, I've seen it work firsthand. We had 3 new partners join us in the London office over the last month, which has, as you can imagine, kept me quite busy. But I think that key theme of energy and focus, you know, they've been making a significant time investments and using themes of client interest. And this has allowed them to bring clients from their existing practice, but also kind of reach out and convert new targets. You know, for most clients, nothing's going to beat that in-person meetup and that face-to-face. But again, to Tom's point, I think you can still have meaningful discussions over Zoom and Teams, you know, as well.
Yeah, I think the point I would add, Katie, was really just to re-emphasize Brian's point about coordination, to actually, you know, make a pitch for a new client. I think is challenging even in person to get the coordination right, to make sure everybody speaks and looks joined up. I think you have to work that bit harder to do it on Zoom, but it certainly can be done. I might now switch to Emma, who will introduce herself briefly, but is General Counsel at Visa. And maybe starting on a slightly different tangent, I think those of us in private practice don't fully understand the challenges of running an in-house legal department at the best of times. These are not the best of times. And just as a starter, Emma, I think we'd all be interested to hear some of the challenges you have continuing to run your legal department, but also your interactions with your in-house clients.
Yes, so thank you, Stephen. As you mentioned, I'm the General Counsel for Visa in Europe. I actually cover not just the legal team, but I also have compliance and I have government engagement, public policy within my group as well. And whilst most people are based in the UK, we've got a number, probably about a third of the team spread across Europe as well in some of our key locations. In terms of how the challenges we're facing, I think that probably many of them are similar challenges to the challenges which everyone working in businesses and law firms and so on will be facing. One of the key issues is obviously connectivity, and you know, I have a significantly sized team, and what we found is that, you know, even as things are arguably getting to a more sort of normal cadence, the desire for people within the team to feel connected to their leadership, to other members of the team, even before you think about, you know, your business clients and your other colleagues, remains as significant as I think it was in the very early days of working from home. Happily, the technology, and I'm glad to say as a technology payments company, our technology is working generally pretty well. But I think as a result, what that has done is meant that for many people, the day is really from sort of start of the day, which now is often earlier because people aren't having to commute in the way that they did before, till the day finishes, is pretty much full of calls, whether video calls, voice calls or whatever. And therefore, one of the big challenges is actually getting, you know, then the work that you need to do done before you're in the office, wherever that may be, your dining room, your kitchen, whatever, to start the next day. So I think that work and burden of work is a significant challenge, and it's a challenge to ensure that when you don't have the face-to-face visibility with team members or see them around you, to really have an open and very transparent communication to ensure that you are understanding what challenges they're finding in terms of getting their work done, and being very clear about the fact that, you know, flexibility is key here. And people have to really reach out, because without somebody reaching out and saying, for example, I'm really finding it difficult because I've got 2 small children, you know, I need to look after them, we're taking it in turns, you know, maybe I can only work between these hours. Or for somebody who's saying, I'm working in my small office, sort of within a tiny flat, I'm sharing it with other people, it's tough for me to operate, or indeed I've just got too much going on. I think, you know, we need to really be much more aware of checking in, but also encouraging people to check back in. And I think the other point I would make is, from a business perspective, you know, a lot of what we're doing, particularly in relation to the lawyers and the compliance team, you know, is answering ad hoc queries and you know, really working very closely with our business contacts to understand what they're working on and get a sense of, you know, left field questions that they may have that they mightn't have thought of unless they saw you in the office, or unless they had the chance just to pop up. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to really get that additional engagement, particularly where you've got new team members either within our team or new business people who maybe don't know what sort of questions they should be asking. So there's a whole variety of things, but as I say, I suspect many of this is very familiar to people in the audience and on the panel.
Yes, certainly those points all strike a chord. Given that those challenges, though, from an in-house perspective, is there anything in particular external law firms could be doing a bit more of, or something a bit better to alleviate some of those challenges on the in-house side? So
a lot of the comments that were made by the previous speakers were very resonant with me. And I think the answer is definitely. There's a lot that our external service providers can be doing. And one of those things is, as was mentioned, I think, by a number of people, is just really trying to understand what it is that we at Visa, as the in-house team, really need. And, you know, what are the challenges we're facing, and what's really going to help us? Because, you know, very often, and it surprises me, and I think this is true of pre-COVID as well as post-COVID, every time I have a relationship meeting, I emphasize the fact that, you know, it's all really about understanding us, understanding our business. But I'm always surprised, having given an open invitation to have that discussion, that people don't really take us up on it. And therefore, take COVID, we're inundated by mailings from a range of law firms, including our key relationship firms, that are obviously ones they've put together and they're sending out to all clients, without really taking any thought as to whether Visa as a payments technology company is interested in capital markets issues, or, you know, as an example. And I think at a certain point, it just gets overwhelming. We've got more than enough on our plates already. And just seeing what are effectively spam emails, you know, there may well be some useful stuff in there. But the truth of the matter is that, you know, there are a limit to the number of emails that one can read through about health and safety issues and return to work and all of these sorts of things. And so I think the firms that have done best are the ones that really think about and even have that dialogue with us as to, you know, what's really going to help you. Also thinking about, and again, I think this point was mentioned earlier about, you know, real understanding the segmentation. Brian said this, of, you know, Visa, we're in payments technology. We're also a company which happily has a pretty resilient business model. Therefore, we aren't making people redundant or having to furlough or what have you. However, because of the nature of the organisation, we're actually doing a lot now with government that maybe we previously hadn't done, in terms of looking at how disbursements can be made, how can we help with that process. We're doing lots of initiatives to, you know, help with contactless and digital payments, for example, helping small merchants. all of that sort of thing, if you knew the company or had a reasonably good understanding of it, you'd recognise that's the sort of thing that we're really going to be particularly interested in, whether it's what is the government thinking or what's the legal framework around that. But also, particularly for the larger firms who are multi-jurisdictional, what are we seeing other clients doing? What are we seeing governments doing? And are there things where we could perhaps find out if these might be interested in getting involved in them? Because there are some really big themes that are obviously applying across governments and across the board. So I think it's been disappointing that we really haven't had more of that targeting and more of that use of understanding of where we are, or even asking us the question, how is Visa doing? What are you thinking about? And again, what's going to be most helpful to you?
And presumably, Emma, it would be relatively easy, as you say, given the amount of information that's being pumped out at the moment, for somebody in a law firm to sit back and say, actually, what I think Emma might be interested in is this bit of it, and then ringing you and drawing that to your attention and chatting to you about it, because they understand you, and actually combining that understanding with the personal outreach we're talking about would be a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm not suggesting that all firms haven't been doing that, and some have. And it's been interesting that some of our closest relationship firms have been doing it and doing it well, but equally some haven't. And firms that maybe we haven't had such a pre-existing relationship with have actually been thoughtful about it and are somewhat stealing a march, and are maybe providing something to us on a less regular basis, perhaps once every few weeks. I can think of a partner at a firm that's doing that and is doing what's quite a nice mixture of, some fun things that they're doing as a firm, whether it's putting together a cookbook or, with client and employee recipes, but it's also then added into, plus we're working on this particular issue, which we think you as an organisation might be, really interested in. And so it's taking a very targeted and very thoughtful approach, and mixing up a little bit the work with the personal, which I think then has the ability to potentially create a better connection for the firm from a business perspective, but also from a client relationship perspective.
That ties into a question we've just received, and at this point I would encourage people to keep the questions coming in. There's quite a lot come in, we probably won't get through them all, but certainly one question I just read I think ties to that point, Emma, and it was somebody saying, particularly in the context of maybe cultures where this face-to-face trust building is important, and in the context of maybe firms you don't know as well, how would you advise a lawyer to, particularly, as I say, in the context where they maybe don't know you that well, how do they, in this environment, try and relationship build without looking like an ambulance chaser?
I think it's all about, again, it's all about that targeting and being thoughtful about what it is you are offering, and where you might have something that will really engage with me. So I would say, and it doesn't have to be me, I think very often the mistake sometimes that's made is that the view or the misunderstanding that the general counsel is always the one that has final say on choice of law firms and whatever. And I think very often that I'm definitely outvoted by members of my team. So I think it's, thinking about, reading about organisations. If there is an organisation which you are particularly interested in breaking into, and you've got an area of expertise that you want to, and you think might be very relevant, reading newspaper reports, as I say, looking at, what is it that Visa's doing currently? Where is it that you may have spoken on something, or you may have done a transaction that might be interesting, or perhaps you're, developing expertise in an area that you might think is of relevance, and then doing something very specific, either to me or, to one of my team. Most people now are on LinkedIn and things like that. And so you can find relatively easily, either on a personal basis or on an institutional basis, what, you know, key themes might be. And I think that's a very good way of doing it. Or potentially, you know, where people are, you know, putting together panels or thinking of speakers or whatever, looking for somebody perhaps in that area that you might not have a relationship with, but you could approach and say, look, we're putting this together. We think you've got very relevant expertise. Would you like to speak and contribute? And at least that gets you a first foot in the door.
Picking up on another question, Katie, somebody was asking sort of the old 80-20 rule, you know, look after existing clients for 80% of the time and think about new clients for 20% of the time. Do you think that holds in the current environment, or should we be putting, I guess, a bit more emphasis on new clients? Or maybe I could argue that the other way, more emphasis on existing clients.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting question, actually, and I have to be honest, it's quite a difficult one. I think it does still hold, but I do think that there is more opportunity, as I was saying before, that if you bring that energy and enthusiasm, I think there's a different conversation. You know, the clients that you have an existing relationship with, as people have said, it is that personal, empathetic, how are you doing? And I think with new clients, I think getting the right approach and tone, and asking the right questions and explaining how you're going to deliver value, and develop that relationship with that client. So I think it's probably changed slightly. So I probably wouldn't say it's 80-20 anymore. And I think, you know, being targeted and looking for new opportunities, I think if there's a time to do it, then why not now?
Okay, I'm conscious that we're going to finish on time, as all good webinars should. So I might try and crack through a variety of questions, and I'll move them around the panel, but ask for pretty punchy answers. Rochelle, somebody followed up on your comments about the analytics. Just give us a very brief feel for this.
Absolutely.
You're using and how you're using them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a good example of that is something that Brian and I both touched on in terms of our account teams. We do look at those on an annual basis, and beyond just looking at the fees billed or the fees collected year over year, we also look at things like total matters, new matters that were opened, how many different practice areas are we doing work in for that particular client, so somewhat of a cross-collaboration measurement. We also look at the number of contacts in our CRM system and have those increased, so we can see if we're expanding our footprint at that client.
Okay, thanks, Rochelle. Brian, somebody was interested about your references to products group. Maybe explain a bit about them and how the role they play in business development.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. There are a number of products. Really, the best ones are hot topics. So these are changes in legal or regulatory issues that the client has to react to, irrespective of the sector that they're in. So a couple of good examples might be anti-money laundering that cuts across a number of sectors. It might be something like the introduction of DAX 6 in the tax sphere. It might be corporate governance, but there will be a number of topics that clients are having to deal with. The best ones are the ones that are time bound, so they have to do something within a certain time frame. It's something that they might not have dealt with before, and the best ones, as I mentioned, are the ones that are not industry specific, because this then allows you to come together as a firm and say, okay, we have, let's say, AML, so we are going to talk to our clients around the AML questionnaires that the regulator might be sending them, or changes that will impact their business. And then it takes us out of these practice groups. So I started by saying often we will have lots of different initiatives. The idea behind getting behind some hot topics is that hot topics bring us together, and they also allow us to go and talk to the client together and cover a number of clients without it being industry specific. So it's just a very effective way to reach out to clients at the right time and talk to them and help them through an issue in a very practical way.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Tom, you were talking about your various training programs for lawyers. In light of the current environment, what one thing would you leave us with in terms of what we should be doing in this environment?
Well, one thing, it's difficult to get a trainer to give you one thing on one bullet point. Essentially, it stems from the fact that people buy emotionally and justify logically. So for me, it is all about making a truly empathetic connection with someone. If you do that without credibility, if you do it without the kind of research or the interest that Emma's been speaking about, you're going to fail. So it has to be genuine. And I think, you know, right now, lawyers would be really well served by spending some time talking to their colleagues and coming up with business solutions to more complex problems that their clients face. Because you can talk to your colleagues, it will integrate you more as a firm. Great way to build those internal relationships and to begin to differentiate so that you're not a single practice group lawyer, you're offering a business solution.
That's a great piece of advice, Tom, and I think it ties very well to the points Brian was making about coordination and integration within the firm. Katie, the most difficult question with only a minute to answer. Clearly, as Emma mentioned, all the law firms are pumping out memos about COVID this and COVID that. And I think we're seeing, certainly I'm hearing, real client resistance to this. It's almost enough already on COVID. You know, talk to me about the things that are actually impacting my day-to-day business. In this time where there's so much material being produced, how are you going about trying to differentiate your materials to make sure your clients are reading your materials?
Yeah, great question and difficult, but I'll try and make it as quick as possible. I think, you know, we want our clients to know that we were here for them through this and we're here for them for the next 10 years. And so I started an initiative in the London office, which we titled London Calling. And it was really to try and track and monitor the conversations that partners and counsel were having with their clients. So that we could kind of pick up some trends that were coming through, but also almost make it into a bit of a competition. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that lawyers do like a bit of competition. So we actually had a bit of a leaderboard. And although it's obviously about quality over quantity of conversations, it was quite interesting to kind of get a little bit of momentum around this initiative, and having that leaderboard really helped. So I think it is that personal outreach, and as Emma was saying, you know, I hate to think how many emails she receives from law firms all around the world. So making it targeted is just so important.
I'll avoid making the sorry, Emma, I was coming to you anyway, but fire away.
Oh, so I'll jump in. So there were two things I was just going to leave as my final observations. One is the fact that we are going through a crisis, and organisations, law firms are suffering, clients are suffering, etc. The one thing that law firms are not very good at talking about is fees and fee arrangements. And, you know, I think that that's an area where having an open conversation about, you know, what is it that, you know, we can be discussing or thinking about differently would be a win-win for the both. And the other thing, I was just going to mention something Rochelle said, that even people without children do like cookies.
There's just a box of cookies on their way now, Emma. From I just one last question in the closing seconds, Emma, and I'm trying to leave on a forward-looking note of post-lockdown. Do you think we've seen the end of meetings, or you see that we will creep back to normality, both in-house meetings and you'll be ringing up your law firm saying, I'd like to have a meeting, can you come round?
I think at the right time, meetings there will definitely be a place for them. It's something that we're thinking about as an organisation, because working from home has worked well, and we anticipate it's going to be a while, particularly in the UK, before people are able to or feel comfortable going back into an office using public transport, etc., even commuting. And so when we do actually start going back to the office, it's going to be more restricted in terms of numbers, and therefore it's not going to be just necessarily for the social interaction, but for a really positive, collaborative reason. And so I think, absolutely everybody's looking forward to the opportunity to be doing face-to-face. But I think we will be more thoughtful about how we do that, when we do that, and particularly where it may involve, travel over distance or what have you, being really thoughtful about what we're expecting people to do and being more flexible.
Great, that's a great answer and an encouraging one, so thank you, Emma. We're on time. We will close now. On behalf of all our participants, and I think we hit about 95 at one point, let me thank Katie, Brian, Rochelle, Tom, and in particular Emma for sharing her thoughts as one of our clients. I found this session really interesting. I thought it was a really good discussion. So thank you all very much. And with that, we will close. Thank you.
Thank you.